Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. I am Suzanne Sherman, and I will be your host for the next hour here on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Joining me in our studio today is Justin Spears, a school teacher and a noted author now, writer for some articles that are published by FEE. One just came out as well. FEE is the Foundation for Economic Education. So we'll be getting into that. And I'll have some announcements coming up as well. Jeff Johnson is producing. We're going to be talking a little bit about some earthquake preparedness today, given the doozies that have been hit in Southern California. We'll get into a little bit of neo-Marxism, the Declaration of Independence, the public school system, some of the teacher abuses that are occurring there right now, as well as the indoctrination against our traditional and proven historic foundations as well. There was an article from Saloon, once again, the tedious narrative that the Declaration is misogynistic and racist, yada, yada. We'll get into that. Justin's going to be explaining how they refute that in their curriculum. Justin, hat tip to you. Thank you for fighting the good fight and teaching positive history. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on this morning.
Always happy to have you. I want to remind everybody you can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. CRN is our fan page. We get a lot of great discussions with our listeners there. We encourage all of you that are following us to please share our posts and try and spread the word. It's, as you know, it's an uphill battle to try and get the word out. Facebook likes to share a lot of pictures of what people have for dinner, but they really don't want to keep the information. They really don't want to share the information, I should say, that could really help us better our lives and try and fix where we're going right now politically. You know, the neo-Marxists are running the show, and we've got a significant uphill battle. You can also listen live on YouTube and join our live YouTube chat. If you can't listen live, we have a SoundCloud page as well, and all of our downloads are free. You can find our YouTube page, the SoundCloud page, all of that on the social media bar on my website, SuzanneCSherman.com. My published articles are there from the 10th Amendment Center, the American Conservative, Abbeville Institute. My blogs are there too. I've got a few in the works as well. Justin, I believe you also have a website. Oh, and I also want to give a shout out to our good friend Alan Mosley, the Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. Really, really great job of sharing our posts. We really appreciate that. Tell us about your website, Justin. What's up with you as well?
Yeah, so I think, as I've mentioned before, my coworker, Mike Margison, and I, we used to host the show The Other Side. We took a break from that to write a book, and we're close to having our first draft done. We hope to have it done by the end of August, called Failure, the History and Results of a Broken School System. And so Mike's going to do a lot of the historical stuff. He's going to take you back to Prussia and talk a little bit about what went on back in Prussia and how the roots of our school system are based in the Prussian model. And then I kind of walk through some of the results, the things that go on in schools today, and just how they let our kids down in terms of attempting to try to educate them. So we're working on that right now. And in advance of that, we created a website called edfailure.com, all one word, edfailure.com. You can go there and find information about us, the upcoming book. We have a lot of resources. We link to people that have been influential to us, including SuzanneCSherman.com and the Cerberus Radio Network. And so, that's really where we're at right now. I'm also, as you mentioned too, writing for FEE.org, the Foundation for Economic Education. Just had a piece released this morning on what separates Generation Z from millennials. So took a little bit of time to write about some generational stuff going on in a defense of Generation Z. So you can check that out. That just launched this morning over at FEE.org.
And you know, we're going to save some time. I promise everybody that, so we can address that article as well. Justin, maybe you can put it in the links for me in our Hangouts chat. I'd really appreciate that. One more show announcement before we get to the meat and taters of the show. Quick announcement for tomorrow's show on Tuesday. I have Naked and Afraid superstar Russell Sage joining me. He's also written a book on survival and preparedness for children. I have it right here in front of me, and it is called Where is Everyone? A Story for Young Adventurers in Wilderness Survival. I got to say, it raises some amazing points in there, and we'll be giving away a copy. We're going to probably share. We'll figure out who we're going to give this to. So we're going to share that and talk about that, as well as his adventures on Naked and Afraid, survival in general. And he also does a lot of work with at-risk teens with regards to wilderness therapy. So I'm really looking forward to that interview, as I am our show today. Want to just start with a few minutes of earthquake preparedness. If you go to my website, SuzanneCSherman.com, I have a poll. If you scroll down, you'll see a page that says suggested reading. Scroll down. It doesn't have a headline of its own, a heading of its own on there, but on there we have Amazon affiliate links. By the way, there's also a donate button if you're so inclined to donate via PayPal. Help us out. If you order on an Amazon link, it does not cost you any more money if you do it through our page than you would otherwise, and it will help us out as well. I have on there a link to the national bestseller, Handbook to Practical Disaster Preparedness for the Family. I've interviewed its author before a few times, Arthur T. Bradley, PhD. This was the book that got me started. I started watching that show, Doomsday Preppers, and realized living in a shipping container and bugging out in a school bus with chickens, goats, and hazmat suits, running around on my lawn doing firearms drills wasn't really the way to be prepared. It makes for good entertainment, but it doesn't really help you in an emergency. Arthur T. Bradley's book got me started, and he has a chapter called the five horsemen of death. And I believe off the top of my head, those are earthquakes, wildfires, tsunamis, floods, and tornadoes, hurricanes. So let's see. We've got these here. And again, the five horsemen, here it is listed: earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods. Earthquakes, he does a really good job about talking about the dangers of earthquakes. Now, as these were going on in California, I had friends that were posting, and I was asking about the preparedness of some of them. And obviously, they weren't ready at all. And some of them even live down in the heart of downtown Los Angeles and don't even own a vehicle. Think about that. If there's such a major calamity and you can't even get out of a major metropolitan area, I guess how prepared you are is really up to you. But that was not something that really appealed to me. But the major dangers of earthquakes, and we're not going to get into this too much because we've got a lot to cover. You can get the book. Structural damage to your home, disruption of utilities. So are you prepared if the power goes out? I am. We just had a minor power outage here. My generator kicked right in. Landslides, avalanches, huge problem in California. Surface faulting. I've been getting pictures of the road in Southern California where, after I think one of the earthquakes was 7.1, you could see the fault line where it went through the road. Tsunamis, they're having some tsunami warnings out there also. Liquefaction, that was a big issue in the Marina district after the Loma Prieta earthquake, where the sand, the foundation was primarily sand in the Marina district. And when that started shaking, the water got, I guess, shaken loose in there, and it became just liquid and everything collapsed on top of it. Flash floods. Then they talk about, how you can be prepared and what actions. And this really resonated with me because, having lived in California as a kid, I kept hearing all of this, California is eventually going to end up in the ocean. And for me, I thought, well, what day is that going to happen? And I was thinking, also, when these earthquakes are happening, I think this Cal exit movement's getting kind of serious. But I digress. So think about what your needs are at your home. Think about what might be overlooked. What might you really need if an earthquake happens in the middle of the night? Do you have some solid shoes you can just hop right into in case there's a lot of broken glass? What's going to happen? What about the power lines by your house? If you need to run out of your house, is there a route where you want to go where you can avoid dangers like that? Let's say the structural integrity of your house is okay, but you can't get out of your house for other reasons. How long can you stay there? Do you have adequate water? Do you have adequate food? You don't really have to worry too much about staying warm in California like you do out here where I live in the wintertime if something happens, but those are all things to think about. Think about your personal security. There are many opportunists out there. They're going to seek advantage of the opportunities presented to them when security is going to be a little bit light. So just wanted to touch on that. Again, you can purchase that book, the Handbook to Practical Disaster Preparedness for the Family, Arthur T. Bradley, PhD. There's an Amazon affiliate link on SuzanneCSherman.com. You guys have anything you want to add to that?
I don't really, because honestly, I live on the coast where there aren't the earthquakes. Now, are there earthquakes here? Sure. There's always been earthquakes around here, but they're so minor, most people don't even know we had them. I mean, we all live on a tectonic plate. I mean, it's inevitable there's going to be earthquakes, but we don't have the big ones like they do out west. And so I really don't plan for earthquakes. Maybe I should, but we plan more for the flooding and hurricanes and high winds or tornadoes back here.
You know, I also talked about, and I've interviewed this gentleman as well, John McCann, well known in the preparedness and survival communities, a United States Marine Corps veteran. And he wrote a book called Wake Up Call. It is a fiction. It's a work of fiction, but I like to talk about these books. We've had Boyd Craven, a very well-known author in this genre as well. These books can give you a lot of insight. They can entertain you. And as you read these books, you can realize, oh, you know what? I overlooked that myself. He wrote a book called Wake Up Call, and apparently there is a fault in the New York area. And this was it features a couple that lives in that area. Major earthquake comes through, and it shows really where they completely failed to be prepared at all. And then this character in the story, who's a Marine who lives down the street, is prepared, and it shows how the two of them work together, how he helps them to learn on the fly as they're going through these travels. But the point being, you want to learn this stuff ahead of time. You want to be prepared and not try and be reactive. You want to be proactive. So I think that's about all I want to say on the matter. But again, that's a great book, Wake Up Call. I haven't linked that on my site, but you'd help John McCann out if you read it. And I have to say, it's a fantastic read. I don't know if you read that one, Jeff, but I loved it.
I don't know. I'd have to look in my Kindle. I have so many books there.
Well, I want to touch on a few things. As we know, last week was 4th of July. We didn't do a show afterwards, and there was a lot of discussion about Donald Trump's parade. I'm not going to really get into that today, but we have the discussion as well about the neo-Marxists have really taken over. You know, quickly, just a quick backup. We had an 8-year-old girl. I don't know if any of you have seen the videos, but she does some videos making fun of Che Guevara, aka AOC. And this girl, her name is Ava Martinez, 8-year-old girl. She perfectly, they say, impersonates, again, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and she was forced to delete all of her social media accounts after she and her family were harassed by liberals. She's gotten harassment and death threats. The family said they've gone too far, and they've been getting calls on their personal phone numbers. For our safety and our child's safety, we deleted all mini AOC accounts. How is that for a lesson in tolerance and acceptance? By the way, these are the people that hide behind the children in their gun grab propaganda. Oh, if we can save one life. Yet here they are threatening to kill one of the very people they pretend to care about because she's mocking their golden girl. How many times a week do late night comedians, Saturday Night Live guests, specials focus on attacking? A lot of this stuff isn't even funny. People that disagree with them. I'm not going to say conservatives because Donald Trump isn't a conservative, clearly. But nonetheless, if you disagree with them, their God, their religion, their neo-Marxist agenda transcends, illuminates what their real agenda is. And that is to take our rights away, go after our guns. Again, when it comes to protecting the children and not being hateful, they cannot live up to that standard that they demand at all. There's another incident. Again, how do they get away with this? How do they get away with this? We had a rapper pulling out of a festival when she learned that people of color got to get in for $10 less. And our listener, our good friend Andrew, screen captured from their website showing that if you were a person of color, you could get in for $10. Everybody else, meaning white people, $20. We had and this is an article on Fox, a biracial rapper pulled out of a Michigan music festival after she learned white people would be charged twice the amount to attend than people of color. Tiny Jag, whose real name is Jillian Graham, was scheduled to perform at Afro Future Fest event in Detroit in August. Again, Andrew went to the website and he actually screen captured where it showed that white people would have to pay more. Why do they get away with this? Jeff, you had a point that somebody should go to federal court and sue. Could you imagine if there was, I don't know, a country music concert that said, sorry, African Americans, you get to pay double? How would that one go over?
Well, it certainly would end up in federal court, but it won't end up in federal court because they are racially discriminating against white people. It's a race. If we're going to go that way, if we're going to call whatever, it's just ridiculous. If there's a BET, if you had a WET, I'm talking about television now, there would be a outcry. There'd be lawsuits in federal court because they were racist. But it's okay to have that. It's okay to have all the Spanish channels that push the Spanish race. But
again, and this goes also, apparently Beto O'Rourke was campaigning in Mexico, and he was one of the front runners criticizing Donald Trump for collusion with Russia. Now, campaigning with Mexico to me sounds like foreign intervention or interference in American elections. But, and now we have another one. We're talking about slavery reparations, $17 trillion price tag. Kamala Harris is not being left off the pandering bus, also saying she has, I forgot how many tens of billions or hundreds of billions. So blacks can own homes. I think we had a housing bubble that resulted of these programs, and the market did not respond favorably. In fact, it was an absolute disaster. But how did we get to this point? We have Antifa running wild in Portland, without any kind of ramifications whatsoever, unless it's extremely egregious. We saw some of the injuries and some people were charged there. We're seeing people that are assaulted. We saw that during the election cycle when individuals were going to Donald Trump's rallies. They were being victimized by having eggs thrown at them, if not worse. How do we come about this? We are seeing from the education system this indoctrination. I remember when I was in middle school being taught that the founders hated Black people so much they decided they only counted as 3/5 of a person. That was the message. I remember also being taught that the Pilgrims were the first to settle America. We know that's not true. But we made our little pilgrim puppets for Thanksgiving. Jamestown. It was Jamestown. America was settled in the South, but we have this revisionist history where all things wonderful came from New England. Justin, we're going to have you weigh in on this one after I bring up an article from Saloon, because I know, or is Saloon or Salon, it's called The 4th of July's Ugly Truth Exposed. The Declaration of Independence is sexist, racist, prejudiced. Now, I've actually been to a Federalist Society discussion where our good friend Kevin Gutzman was speaking, where he spoke about the founders' intentions when they drafted and ratified the Constitution, or I guess you want to call them the framers. And I guess the rebuttal by the law school professor was this exact same premise. They were misogynists, they were bigots, they were racists, they were homophobes. Therefore, the principles they stood for were irrelevant and need to be revamped by guess who? The federal judiciary. So let's address this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I'm just going to hit the high points, or I should say low points. They criticized the Declaration of Independence because, first, it did not condemn slavery. It did not protect the rights of women. To the disadvantage of Native Americans, Jefferson placed the phrase property with happiness when saying that human beings' basic rights include life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Somehow that disadvantages Native Americans. So those are the three. Those are the three low points on there. And I'll share, and I think I have shared Kevin Gutzman's repudiation of these. But Justin, let's get your take, because you, as a public school history and I believe social studies teacher, address lists. So I'm gonna put my feet up, sip my coffee, and listen to what you teach your students about that. God bless you for your efforts, by the way.
Well, thank you. Sometimes I feel like I'm swimming a very, very difficult upstream battle. But yeah, what I try to do, I should say, and I think Mike, he doesn't do as much with government. He's more on the econ side. But, when I teach my government class to seniors at the school that I'm at, I take a very critical approach to trying to get students to understand, first off, why government? Why do we even need government? Why do we have government? We spend a couple of weeks on that, and then we pretty quickly kind of catch up to foundational documents out of the Enlightenment period and the influence that Enlightenment thinkers had on our founding fathers. And so, kind of piggybacking off of that, when it comes time to talk about the Declaration of Independence, what we do is we look at documents that would have had an impact on Jefferson and the others that were kind of in that process. I know Jefferson was very reluctant to pen the Declaration of Independence. He was more or less coerced into doing it, but the ideas that made its way into to the document. And so we look at things like common sense, right, from Thomas Paine. We look at some of what was written by George Mason in Virginia. We look at letters that were written from local, principalities, towns that were urging their state at the time to take a position of, basically secession from the British Empire. And so, we go through and we read these primary documents. Now, 2019, reading primary documents with 17 and 18-year-olds is a difficult challenge. It's a challenge for me. I mean, I'll be honest with you. There's times where I'll read through things for the fourth, fifth, sixth time and still have questions about it. So I don't want to make it sound like, there's this silver bullet out there that if every, teacher in America would just, revert to reading through the primary documents, that everything would be solved. I'm not necessarily saying that, but I'm saying, though, that process, I think, is far superior to what you're going to get if you open up your Pearson McGruder's government textbook and read the standard narratives that you just went through, right? And I think that's really, if that even, what a lot of our youth are hearing today is kind of the bullet points that you went through in that piece. And so it's difficult sometimes for students to grasp the concepts of, what was going on. And I think probably the biggest takeaway that I try to leave my students with in understanding what was going on here is you cannot apply 2019 logic to 1776. That's not fair to do that. And I think Dr. Gutzman talked about that in his rebuttal, more or less, in trying to get people to understand, well, why didn't they condemn slavery? Well, first off, Jefferson wanted to. Jefferson had much more harsh language against the king and his role for slavery. I think it was probably even a little unfair, but suffice it to say, yes, he was a slave owner, but he also understood how abhorrent the slave trade was, as did many of the other founding fathers as well. But we have to understand, when you talk about, well, what about the women? What about, minorities and things like that? Things that today we look at and we would say, of course, right? We wouldn't want the exclusion of people based off of race or of gender or things of that nature. But back in 1776, it was just a much different world, obviously, but I think we gloss over it when we say that. I mean, you really have to stop and think about, what does that mean? You can't take your worldview in 2019 and try to apply it to 1776, right?
Let me
So I think that's what I try to get my students to understand as we read through the things that Payne and Mason. I'll tell you, there's one document in particular that we read that's very, very difficult for the students to get through, but we see probably the biggest like eye-opening experience through it. It's a letter from a slave. It's a slave petition in Massachusetts, and there was a slave that wrote this letter basically calling for what the Declaration called for. Now, again, obviously, it didn't get applied to the way that we see it today, but those ideas did exist, and people did understand. They were wrestling with, right, like what do we do with this? How do we go about addressing slavery? And I think that's important to study it from that perspective, not so much from the, well, why didn't they just wave the magic wand and make it all disappear and everything go away, right? So that's what we try to, or at least like I said, I try to do to get kids to understand the foundation, at least through a document like the Declaration of Independence.
Let me address some excellent points that you made here. First of all, the intent of the Declaration of Independence was solely to indicate our separation in a legal manner from England and to address the grievances against King George. That being said, it was not the proper forum to address the issues that were criticized in that article. Nonetheless, it is still incorrect because, again, Kevin Gutzman did a great commentary on this, and I'm going to just go through it quickly. But he said of the 5 men who drafted the Declaration of Independence, excuse me, Roger Sherman of Connecticut drafted the Connecticut law that abolished slavery in Connecticut. I bet no one over at Salon or Saloon knows that. Benjamin Franklin was a president of an abolition society that submitted a petition to abolish slavery in the first U.S. Congress. John Adams, the chief draftsman of the Massachusetts Constitution of 1780, wrote the section that was read by Massachusetts courts as having abolished slavery in Massachusetts. Thomas Jefferson. Okay, see, yeah, those guys were all New Englanders. They were all Northerners. Here we have our Southerner. Co-sponsored a bill in 1769 to abolish slavery in Virginia. He wrote the first draft of the law that banned slavery from the Midwest, called for and signed the law to abolish the international slave trade, wrote the most influential anti-slavery book in American history, drafted a bill which failed by 1 vote in Congress that would have banned slavery from most of today's Deep South, and wrote the part of the Declaration of Independence that said all men are created equal. Robert Livingston. He admits that he doesn't know that record as well, but he knows that several of the political rallies in New York and some of his relatives were involved in anti-slavery, which led to the abolition of New York slavery in 1799, signed by his friend John Jay. So, when they come out and parade these opinions that the Declaration is a racist document, again, what we typically see is nothing but emotionalism, ad hominem rhetoric, absolutely devoid of facts. And then when you also mentioned, Justin, about looking retroactively and judging yesterday's activities by today's standards, I actually had a tour guide at Montpelier tell me that same thing. There is, if you take a tour of James Madison's home, a dining room, and it has cardboard cutout figures of guests who would have sat with James and Dolly Madison at their table, one of which is the Marquis de Lafayette. And she said that he chided him, Madison, for not releasing his slaves. Here's a proponent of freedom and our rights, yet why didn't he free his slaves? And she kind of smirks and puffs her little chest out, all proud of herself. And I just raised my hand and I said, did you consider James Madison to be a law-abiding individual? And she said, yes. I said, well, how could he turn his slaves free? And she said, well, I know in some states it was unlawful to do so. I said, here, we're standing in one. The states you're referring to, one of which is Virginia. It would have been unlawful. And if you did, the slaves had to leave the state within 1 year. And I said, and plus, what were they going to do? This comment I had, I was excoriated over. And I have an article that was published by the American Conservative. Will the founding fathers be remembered as simply as slaveholders? The extended version of that is on my website, Lies My National Parks Told Me. The one in the American Conservative featured the Revolutionary and founding era. And she just said, well, it's difficult to look at that time and not be judged by today's standards. I said, no, it's really not. At that point, somebody got mad at me and said, can we please go back to talking about the room? And my response was, by all means, let's discuss something truly important like the wallpaper. And anytime I'm on these events and I politely raise these issues, I just get a lot of dirty looks from folks. But this is one of the reasons that we're going through what we are today. We are indoctrinated into thinking we were found by a bunch of racists, and this was why we're actually entertaining the thought of a $17 trillion price tag for reparations of those that had slaves or who were slaves. So I mean, I never owned a slave. But it's okay to say we're going to tax some people and make them pay for something they never did. How does that work with principles of fundamental fairness and due process? It absolutely does not.
Suzanne, you have to kind of wonder. You have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of this smearing of the Declaration of Independence? What is the principle there that must be defeated by the neo-Marxists? Well, it's the idea that we can throw off governments that aren't beneficial to the ends of liberty. So, I mean, that's that. And as for reparations, I will say this much. If they pass reparations and demand I pay taxes to pay for these reparations, I will actually quit paying taxes simply because I refuse to be forced to pay for something I never did. I know nobody. Do you know anyone that owned a slave here? Anyone? Bueller? No one here owned a slave. No one knows anyone that owns a slave, and none of the people that would get reparations were ever a slave. So I will refuse to pay. I will take my chances at ending up dead.
Well, one thing I did when I sold my home in California and bought one significantly downsized in Utah was I gave myself a significant cushion where I could live off the proceeds from one house and also investments that I had made. I'd made some good choices and some good selections in buying and selling real estate. So I don't qualify for having to pay federal income tax. That being said, every time I buy fuel, I mean, we know that there are times that we, from one reason for another, are contributing to this federal behemoth. But that being said, it's just a matter of disrupting our traditional values. We see that the values, by the way, those that are offended by this 8-year-old girl, this was a point I wanted to make earlier. Well, you shouldn't involve girls in politics. How many boys do we see paraded around like little girls in the gay pride events? It's okay to politicize children and indoctrinate children if you're on one side or the other, but everything is always skewed in one direction. That being said, Justin, let's get back to the public school system. You had sent me some articles about teacher abuse, and I don't think, and when I say that, I mean abuse of teachers. And I had some incidents when I was growing up. I've seen it myself, but you shared some pretty disturbing articles. Let's have you run with that a little bit, and then we'll talk about your Gen Z article when we wrap up the show.
Yeah, so obviously, over about the last year or two, I've come to really see what public education's like, being a part of it. I'm 10 years in now. As I said before, I'm a non-traditional teacher, right? So I spent the first part of my career in the business world and got into education under the auspices of wanting to work with youth and make an impact and help out. And then I quickly realized, what it was like on the inside. And so, for all of the things that get talked about with our public education system, whether it's standardized testing, money, teacher pay, school conditions, on and on and on, The one thing that never, I don't know that I've ever seen it brought up other than the reporting of it happening, is a discussion on teacher abuse. And so in the process of writing the book that I'm writing right now, I kind of document, what it's like on the inside of our schools today. And I go through everything. I go through the setup of the classroom, what, pedagogy or teaching practices are all about. And then I hit on this. And as I was doing the research for it, I was blown away as I did, just simple Google searches on teacher abuse stories. And you'll find them all the time. And they usually get sensationalized. Unfortunately, they oftentimes get kind of satirized or made fun of, especially if it has to do with a young female teacher having sexual relations with a student. People joke about, well, where was that teacher when I was in school? And, things like that.
Yeah, wait till it's your kid.
Right, exactly. And so, again, I started diving more through that avenue, and then looking at other forms of abuse as well, because obviously, sexual abuse is just one avenue of which this abuse occurs. There's mental abuse and certainly physical abuse. You can find, and I would encourage listeners to go out and just do simple Google searches of teacher abuse, physical abuse. We saw a story not too long ago. I didn't link this one to you in the notes that we were sending back and forth, but there was a story, and the state escapes me right now, of a teacher who locked a kid in a closet for a day. There was another story of a teacher that handcuffed a student to a desk for a period of time. And so, physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, it all is just mounting up in our public education system throughout the country, and nobody is talking about it.
Quick
But
question.
Yeah.
Question. What is a teacher doing with the set of handcuffs? I mean, is that standard issue equipment in the classroom? Is that something that you guys are issued in case there's an emergency?
No, not at all. I would imagine that those were brought in premeditated, right? I mean, obviously somebody thought through the idea that, like, look, this kid's out of control, so I'm going to bring handcuffs in and handcuff them to the desk. That's not something that would just be sitting around somewhere or is issued, as you said, as equipment. All the stuff that we do get today, that's certainly not one of them. So yeah, that's something where the teacher went out of their way to do that too. So, I think
I'm going to interject here, and the
Sure.
lawyer can expand on this, but that is a crime. That teacher committed a crime.
Were they punished?
No, I don't know the circumstances on what ended up happening. I don't know if they were disciplined or if they ended up losing their job. I'll dig that story up and I'll look at it and I'll send it out. I don't know if there's been an update to it at all or not.
In most states, that's a felony.
Yeah, and that also brings up a lot of questions and concerns about rights of students versus in the school versus teachers and things of that nature. But the point behind all of this is that this is the the 10-ton elephant in the room that nobody seems to want to address, and I don't know why. I don't know why, if it's because it seems like a taboo issue, or if it's something that out of sight, out of mind, or it just gets dealt with at an individual, like, parent level, or like I said to you, Suzanne, I think the only time that we really hear of these things is when these stories break and are run on the nightly news. And I shared a story with you that is difficult for me to share, because I actually have a friend, somebody that I call a friend, somebody that I taught with for 2 years, somebody that lives in the community that I live in, somebody that in this community that I live in a small rural / I'm on the outskirts of what would be suburban Indianapolis. So it's a small community, one where, most everybody knows one another. The varsity football coach and math teacher at our high school that my kids go to, I don't teach in this district that I live in, was found to have had relations with a student. There were messages, I believe, and pictures that were found on his phone of a student. And, I don't know the whole nature. I haven't gone through the gossip mill of digging into it. I don't intend to. He's been terminated from the school corporation, which to me would mean that there was enough evidence to warrant going through and doing that. I know that there is legal action on both sides. I know when the local news station here reached out to him, he referred them to his lawyers. Again, I know that there's a legal pursuit there on that avenue. But then, another thing that I found out after I shared that story with you, Suzanne, is that the principal of the high school was let go because he was complicit in covering this up, right? And so there's another dimension to this. The Good Old Boys Club. This is our varsity football coach. Our football team has, had some success, and you don't want to upset that by having this kind of a thing get out. And again, I want to be very, very clear. I don't know the details of this. I know that the principal was let go. I know that the teacher was let go. So whatever was happening on the inside, I would imagine, because it's, you guys know how hard it is to fire a teacher, right? I mean, it can, you got to do something along these lines to lose your job, right? So, you see a story like that and it hits close to home, and you see it on the nightly news, and then what happens with it, right? We shake our heads. We may make a passing comment to somebody, but then life goes on and we move on. And I just don't understand that. I don't understand why more questions aren't raised. I don't understand why there is blind allegiance to trusting in a figure simply because they have that title of teacher attached to their name. We kind of had this discussion going back to the episode that you did a while back, where we talked about potentially arming teachers after Parkland. And one of the things that I brought up was, look, these people, I've taught with people who were on Prozac, right? And would actively make jokes about, I missed my medicine today, so I'm a different person. I'm a different teacher today. And the kids would know that, and they would share that with the kids. And, that whatever might be harmless or whatever, I don't think it is, but, but to just think and blindly, again, put all of your allegiance, these kids, my teachers will see my kids more throughout the day than I will. Let that set in and sink in. If you are a parent out there that has children in the public school system, your teachers will see your students, your children more throughout the day than you will in terms of hours. And so we've got to really think long and hard. There was another story out of Gary, Indiana, up near Chicago, where a teacher handed out, and I think this made some national news, handed out a most annoying award to a student who happened to be a nonverbal autistic student.
I wanted to address that because you were saying, as we're going about this, we're talking about teachers as bullies. We have a silent, vulnerable contingency in the education system who really have to suffer the most, and that's the special needs kids. And just really quickly going back, we have this deference towards teachers. If people understood, as you alluded to earlier, and you're going to share in your book, the origins of the public school system, maybe they would question putting their kids in. And not only do the teachers see more of the kids during the day, but they also control the time when they come home with these ridiculous homework assignments. I pulled my kids out of school in junior kindergarten and second grade. I told the teachers, my son is in second grade. He has 3 hours of homework a night. You are taking my time. You are taking family time, and we're arguing at the table. My son's tired. He's going to have to get up early in the morning. Then they have homework assignments as they get older to keep them busy on the weekends too. We went to go away on vacation, again in second grade. The teacher gives me a pile of assignments to take with us on vacation. How dare she? So what'd we do? My son knocked them all out that night she gave them to him, and we handed them off to her the last day before we left. She was not happy at all. But again, this is about disrupting our families, our traditions. I had mentioned once to a family member, how many times do kids say, hey, mom, dad, I can't go to church. I've got a paper to write. They laughed at me, but I'm not lying here. This is true. They don't have time to do family activities anymore on the weekends. They're not allowed to go on vacation because of attendance records, which are tied to what? Finances. Let's get back to the special education and the autistic kids. I kind of think about kids that are drowning. They do so silently. You can't hear them. You don't know what they're doing, but they're under the water. You can see them if you're looking, but you can't hear them. Same with these nonverbal autistic kids. Let's share the story you shared with me.
Yeah. So again, up in near Gary, there was a student who's nonverbal autistic, and again, I can only imagine what the circumstances were leading up to this. But a teacher, for whatever reason, you can't even begin to justify it as an attempt at humor or whatever it was, decides to give this young boy a most annoying student award. And it was sad as kind of reading through the account of it. The kid gets this award and he's happy because he understands and knows that he's been given a treat or acknowledgement or attention or whatever it was that, he understood it, but he had no clue as to what the context of it was. And so he brought that home, and obviously mom and dad saw it and they came undone, rightfully so. They go to the school system and demand action. The teacher in that case did get fired. And I believe the last account that I read in our local news was that the school board was looking into firing the teacher, or I'm sorry, the principal of that building as well. Now,
the
again,
was present. Also, the article says when the award was presented, correct?
Right. And so the other part, and I forget who I was reading or listening to that talked about this. I believe it might have been John Taylor Gatto in his book, Weapons of Mass Instruction, talks about the idea of due process being inserted into schools. And at the time he was talking about it from a student perspective, right? So what he was saying is like, okay, discipline really started to go downhill when the idea of due process made its way to kids, because now all of a sudden the teacher was somewhat powerless to be able to discipline a student immediately. So if a student, for example, picked up a desk and chucked it across the room and cursed the teacher out while being sent to the principal's office, well, now there's hearings, right? And there's mediators that are brought in, and the principal's going to listen to the student and then to the teacher. There's all this time that passes, and then a judgment is made. And basically what he was saying is like, look, that makes discipline a very, very difficult thing. The amount of things that students were getting off on was unbelievable. And basically the inmates were running the asylum. But now we've got it in reverse, right? Now we've got it where, because of teacher unions, I mentioned earlier, it's very difficult for a teacher to be fired. There's the infamous stories of the rubber rooms, right, up in New York. I don't know if you've ever heard about those back in the 90s and early 2000s, where they were the government, I think it was Bloomberg or de Blasio, one of the two, whoever was in, I think it was Bloomberg at the time, was trying to make some headway in New York public schools by getting rid of ineffective teachers, but it was virtually impossible to do. So they were sending teachers to these rooms basically to show up, get full salary, and do nothing because they couldn't be fired. And so, nowadays, when I read that story of, well, now the school board's trying to fire, what do you mean trying to fire? It's
Right.
like, this happened, you're done, right? Like, get out of here and let's move on. But again, that's just another symptom of protectionism through unions and the power that they have created in our public school system there through that. So yeah, I really want to encourage listeners to just do a little bit of research on this. Just go out and look at the raw number of stories that are out there that highlight some of the various different examples of teacher abuse, again, whether it be mental, physical, sexual. There are a couple of websites too that you can find. I linked to one through greatschools.org. There's an article on there called When the Teacher's the Bully. And it is, again, another chilling account of hearing the stories. And this is the last thing that I wanted to kind of mention on this topic, Suzanne, and then feel free to respond.
I have this article open. This is a good one. Get into this and then we'll talk about your Gen Z.
Yeah. And so the thing that I really took away from that article there is, the story, the ones that make the nightly news, right? Those are only the ones that we know of. The idea that the teacher having influence not only to be able to abuse, but then to keep silent, right? Because they can hold that power of, your grades or your discipline, or, one call home and I can have your privileges revoked or whatever it might be. There again are some very chilling accounts of students that face that abuse. And then, we wonder why absenteeism is so high. A lot of these students, and you brought this up, a lot of these students are wanting to avoid having to go into these scenarios where they know they've got to face teachers like this. We had another story here just yesterday in a township on the south side of Indianapolis. They're sending law enforcement out to the neighborhoods, knocking on doors of truant students and the parents and saying, look, we're not going to take you to jail, but you need to do your job and get your kid to school. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, pound sand. My job is to be the parent, right? You have no idea why my son or daughter's missing school. Could be medical, could be, something that's going on in the school where they don't want to be there, a situation like this where there's abuse or whatever it might be. So that kind of all leads into what we've been talking about. And the narrative in our book is we've got to return power back to parents, because there's no amount of reform that we can do, no amount of money. There's no right cocktail of people that can be put into the system that's going to make this thing work for everybody. The one size fits all approach is proven to be broken. And we need to allow parents the opportunity to educate their children in a way that they best see fit. And if this is a part of what's going on, it needs to be talked about.
John Taylor Gatto and John Holt, they also explain that the system, the institution itself, is anathema to the physiology and the mental capacity, particularly for little boys, to sit still at a desk setting. My boys, I brought airplanes to junior kindergarten. And the teacher bragged about it being a Montessori type setting. Well, what she wanted was the kids at their own little stations, provided they stayed there. So at the end of the day, after I brought these airplanes for them to play with, she gives them to me. She goes, I had to take them away. I said, oh, okay. May I ask why? They were flying them around the room. Oh, the horror. Oh, my goodness. Little boys being boys. I want to refer you guys to my article or my episode with Dr. Marianne Block from the Block Center in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. She even says, she shares a story about a teacher and the propensity to have a discrimination against these kids that are having some learning difficulties. We've mentioned the autistic boy, and one teacher, she wrote a note saying that the teacher demanded the child be put on medication. Dr. Block was consulted by the parents, and she let the teacher know the child was being treated. Under no pretense did she say the child was being medicated, but that was interpreted by the teacher that she got her way and the kid was now on dangerous psychotropic medication to help this young child focus. What happened? The child did not change at all, but the teacher's perception of the child changed, and her behavior towards said child changed as well. The system itself is dysfunctional. Are teachers abused ever? Absolutely. How do we fix this? Get out of the system. Let's wrap up the show with your latest article from FEE, Justin.
Yeah, so when I went down to FECon about a month or so ago now, I had the opportunity to be able to network with some fantastic minds and just kind of pick brains and get some ideas and creative juices going. And when I came back home, I was kind of debating, what do I want my next piece of writing to be on? And shortly after that, I attended my wife's 20-year high school reunion. And I tell this story in the article. The article is titled "Don't Overlook Gen Z's Creative Edge." And so basically, the genesis of this came from a conversation that I had at that reunion where I, was talking to somebody that I had not seen in a number of years. My wife and I both went to the same high school. We're 2 years apart. And so I know a lot of the same people. And they, casual conversation. Hey, what are you up to? Well, I'm a public school teacher. I teach high school social studies. And then I proceeded to hear a 15-minute diatribe about how, essentially, these snotty-nosed brats, kids are getting ruder and ruder. They're out of control, lack of discipline, the standard talking points that most everybody throws out about kids. And so I went back from that and I started to think about, what I experienced in terms of, seeing things in the classroom and Yes, of course. In every group of people, there's people like that that are, baby boomers, right? You could say that about baby boomers. But I started to kind of think about, you know what, I need to be a voice for youth because you know they try. They try. There are some that are outspoken. There are some that are doing really great work. But unfortunately, the youth obviously kind of get picked on. The one thing that we hear a lot about it specifically is with millennials, right? That they're the whipping posts, and rightfully so in some ways. But
Quick
I think what has
definition, description, define, differentiate Gen Z from millennials.
Yeah, that's what I think needs to happen because here's what my theory is. What's happening is that baby boomers, my generation, generations Y, and Generation X, they're applying that term millennial to anyone that is younger than them. Oh, it's the millennials. They're the ones that want socialism. Look at these kids that are in high school and college. Numbers are showing that they want this, that, and the other. So the first part of the article, I try to go through and differentiate that. And there's some data in there that you can look at. I linked to a story from the Pew Research Center that kind of shows that. And then I kind of dive into a research study that was done by a group called Vision Critical that studied 3 generations, X, Y, and Z. And that one was really fascinating to me because that's where I started to see some of the differences between those 3 generations in terms of attitudes, technology, values, work ethic, so on and so forth. And you can see some of the differences are subtle, specifically with like technology in terms of overall views in those 3 generations of what the role of technology is. And so the one thing that kind of resonated with me, and I'll just read this little pull quote that I had from the study. The researcher said they, being Gen Z, again, these are kids that are actually probably like middle school through about college age kids, right? They, Gen Z, have created a new cultural currency that values uniqueness, authenticity, creativity, shareability, and recognition. What's different for this generation is not as simple as the internet or technology. Technology is an important component, but what's changed is this generation's relationship with culture. So I think what they were trying to say there is that what we're seeing Gen Z do is they're using the technology that's out there to try to redefine, or in many cases define, their culture and how they use that technology. And so I give a couple of examples of the potential of what particularly that technology component means to this generation. And I'll just quickly share, and I hadn't talked to you about this, Suzanne. I would encourage you and the listeners to go check this out. The story of Natalie Hampton. Natalie Hampton is the CEO. She's a student at Stanford University, but she's the CEO and creator of an app called Sit With Us. She has a phenomenal TED Talk story that I linked the YouTube video on the article to. It's about an 8 or 9 minute video. I would encourage everybody to take time out of their day today and watch and listen to her story. She faced some unbelievable adversity, being bullied in school, and doing something beautiful out of tragedy. Out of her story of being bullied, she created an app that allows teens to be able to be inclusive and identify who's sitting alone in lunchrooms and get people together and create relationships and friendships through that. And so I kind of highlight that and chronicle that in the article. And it's just an example of some of the great potential, right, that Gen Z has using technology. So that's kind of the genesis of that article, came from that conversation that I had, and then stumbling across this idea of what Natalie has done with technology.
Interestingly, as much as I criticize technology and how much time kids spend on it these days, and this is an epiphany I had just from listening to you today, so thank you very much, is that maybe there is some hope from the technology that they have, and they can get a perspective that's different from what they are getting in the classroom. And what strikes me is when I was in school, I had my own Google at home back in the 70s, and it was called the World Book Encyclopedia set. My grandfather had given me a set, and I could not wait to finish my homework, which was tedious. Most of it I found unenlightening, uninspiring. But when I was done, did I had my animals, I went out and played and I did all that, but I could not wait. I spent at least an hour or two a day just taking books down at random, or if something popped into my mind, I would look that up and I would read and learn more on my own about topics I found interesting, which is why, and again, we're going to do a show on this, Unschooling, Passion-Driven Education. I talk about that book all the time as well. So get out of the school system, but I have hope that maybe these kids, based on these sites that you have shown and have been talking about, that maybe they can get another perspective there. So Justin Spears, I want to thank you for joining us. We're out of time. What's your website again, really quick?
edfailure.com.
All right. Tomorrow, Russell Sage from Naked and Afraid. You might not be a fan of the show, but you will love what we have to talk about. I'm Suzanne Sherman. On behalf of the rest of us here at Cerberus Radio Network, I want to thank you for listening. Have a great day.